Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to episode 132 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today I have back Adam Turteltaub from the SCCE, Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics, to talk about the 2015 European Compliance and Ethics Institute upcoming. We also visit about some of the other conferences that SCCE has upcoming and what Adam is seeing bubbling up as issues in the compliance field. The episode comes in at just over 23 minutes. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much for listening. Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today I'm extraordinarily pleased to have back my good friend Adam Turteltaub. Adam is the, I forgot your title at SCCE, so what is your
That's
title?
okay, Vice President of Membership Development, and for what it's worth, I found out it was wrong on some of our documents too. So
even better. I've asked Adam if he could come back and talk about some of the upcoming conferences that the SCCE is going to hold over the next few months. I was particularly intrigued by a European conference that's being held in London towards the end of March or early April, but there's several other conferences, and really I just want to see what was on his mind SCCE-wise. So welcome back, Adam.
thank you. Thanks for having me. And, Skype's always a great way we both use to connect.
So the European Compliance and Ethics Institute will be held in London, I think really over the last day or two of March and into April 1 of this year. Can you tell us about how that conference has grown and what we might expect from it this year?
Yeah, it's actually been a great history. We started it, this will be our third year. Last year we came just like 2 people shy of doubling in size, which was great, but it's also torture. It's kind of like getting 5 out of 6 in the lottery. But you shouldn't complain for all the money but you make, but you do. But no, it was great to do that. And this year we're seeing very strong growth. The thing about that meeting, which we found has been a huge draw for people, is that for the most part in Europe, when it comes to compliance and ethics conferences, they tend to either be focused on one topic or one industry. So it's all FCPA, or it's all anti-cartel, or it's all oil and gas, or it's all whatever the category is. This, to what we're finding, is pretty much, if not the only conference in Europe that has a gamut of issues and covers a wide range of industries. And this year, we've expanded it so that we've got 3 simultaneous tracks of sessions going on, other than during the general sessions. So we have 32 sessions for people to choose among during the times of the meeting, which gives us the ability to offer more topics for more people.
Can you detail some of the presentations that are going to be held this year, or some of the speakers, if you know?
Yeah, we've got a good range of topics and speakers and people who, they're really top of mind. Of course, we're going to deal with the big issues like anti-corruption. Bribery compliance is really growing, the compliance profession across the globe. We're seeing that all over the place. I'm actually moderating a session on sanctions. Russia's sanctions are very much on people's mind, and it's important to realize it's not just the U.S. sanctions, but also the EU has a set of sanctions as well. Plus, there's other sanctions for countries like Iran and Venezuela that people have to be aware of. And so for that session, actually, I'm doing it with speakers from BP, BT, as well as looking at a lot of the complexity there. And also we've got, Sharvaka from the University of California, who's on our board. Because one of the things, you have to realize is that when it comes to sanctions area, even hiring a foreign national from a country subject to sanctions may be problematic for your organization. We'll also be looking at data protection and privacy issues. We've got the data privacy person from News Corp speaking on that topic. We'll be looking at the COSO framework that's being developed, and then some bread and butter ongoing compliance issues, things like training, which has been around for a long time. The company's been doing compliance training, but lately we've seen an upsurge of interest in people really looking again at their training and seeing, am I doing it right? What else should I be thinking about? And how do I make it more effective?
Adam, one of the things I've heard you and Roy talk about consistently over the past couple of years is the international growth in SCCE membership. Any thoughts on what might be driving folks outside the United States to join such an organization?
Yeah, and it's significant. We're up to over 650 members now that are outside of the U.S. And I think that really mostly is a reflection, first and foremost, of increasing enforcement of anti-corruption legislation. And it's important to say it's not just the FCPA. The UK Bribery Act, while we haven't seen the levels of enforcement that people expected, nonetheless, there's a lot of anxiety in the market about when the British get up to speed on this, what it's going to mean. And also, what's interesting about that is seeing how far the reach of that is. We're seeing companies that you wouldn't expect to see at our meetings showing up, because they're not like big oil and gas companies, but they're sort of further down the organization supply chain. And as they've started to expand out of their home country, operate with as part of supply chain through multinationals, they're being asked the question, tell us about your compliance program. What do you have? And they're realizing they don't have one. And so what they've been doing is going back and adding them. And one of the things that's been very encouraging we're hearing is that they're finding real value. It may start as an anti-corruption based thing, but realizing, gee, we've created a whole set of internal controls. What else should we be looking at in terms of our risk profile?
So it's been my perception that conferences in Europe are much broader than sort of a compliance conference here in the United States, particularly around issues, or there are more sessions around issues like data privacy, like sanctions, like things that most compliance practitioners don't normally put in the front burner. What are some of the issues you have seen or are seeing that are of interest to Europeans other than FCPA enforcement?
Well, data protection and privacy is huge. I mean, Europe leads the U.S. in that, in terms of the fact that they've much had stronger regimes around there for a while. We now have the issue of the right to be forgotten. You also, start seeing the fact that things like, when you go onto a website for a European company, you get the warning that says cookies are being used here, and you have to tick off that you're acknowledging that. That's obviously a huge issue. And what's, I think, notable is the difference. In the U.S., I think there's been a drive for much more attention because of hacking issues. In Europe, it's more, if you will, philosophical approach to who owns their data, much more feeling the individual does as opposed to the corporation, and greater sensitivity towards that. Other than that, I don't see a ton of difference, except for one other exception, which is when it comes to antitrust or anti-cartel. Europe has a long history of prosecutions there, and people are very obviously interested in wanting to make sure they don't run afoul of any of the laws there.
It's going to be very interesting for my home city in Houston with the proposed merger of numbers 2 and 3 in the energy service area, Halliburton and Baker Hughes, to see what antitrust issues the Department of Justice will raise, but also what will the EU raise, and will they require a divestiture? So that's something that's certainly in Houston, because of that particular merger, is in the forefront of a lot of people's minds. But if someone wanted information on this conference, where would they go?
To a very long URL is the answer. There is a URL that's European Compliance and Ethics Institute.org, which is one long URL, or just go to the corporatecompliance.org, our main website, and then you can find a link to it over in the events area. And I should point out that it's not our only event in Europe this year. We'll also be offering one of our academies there, actually just a couple weeks before. Let me just double check the date, or a couple weeks after, April 13th through 16th. We'll be in Brussels. I think we're up to the 5th or 6th year of doing our academies there. And so the academy, for those not familiar with it, are 3.5-day, really classroom-style training in the essentials of managing a compliance and ethics program. They're great for new compliance people wanting to get up to speed, and a lot of more experienced people use it to prepare for the certification exam that we offer at the conclusion of the academy.
Adam, I'm not sure I've heard it said from you, but I've heard it said that Europeans typically look more to credentialing and actually having a designation after your name as a positive sign than perhaps we do in the United States. Have you found that to be true regarding the SCCE professional designation?
Yeah, and we found it's true not only in Europe but elsewhere. I mean, at this point, we offer the academies well, this year we've got Brussels, which is continuation, Brazil. Again, we'll be back in Dubai for the third time. We were in Shanghai, we're moving to Singapore, and then we added one in Sydney. And one of the things we find, whether it's Europe, South America, or the Middle East, credentials are hugely important. Some areas, they say they're even more important than where you got your university degree. People want to see that you've obtained that, and that's really a sign that you understand the business and you're a part of the profession.
Yeah, that's a very different concept than I think many professionals have here in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
But we've highlighted, and I really did want to highlight the European conference, but there's a wealth of conferences really over the next 2 or 3 months that the SCCE is putting on. I'm certainly familiar with the Utilities and Energy Conference that will be held in Houston. Could you talk a little bit about that one?
Yeah, that's a conference. I think it's about 140 people, and it's really focused on the energy business. We look both at the utility side, as you notice, and then also the oil and gas industry. So it's a good way, and we obviously put it in Houston because that is the capital of the energy industry. So it's a great way to sort of, one, learn what the key issues are and hear directly from your peers, but also you can't discount the value of the networking opportunity. I think one of the mistakes people consistently make is they evaluate a conference just on what the sessions are, and when they look at it, they count down the sessions that make the most sense for them and lose track of how much value comes from really who you sit next to in a session, who you talk to, who you meet, because once the meeting's over, you obviously come back with a lot of great ideas, but during the course of the year, you come up with a lot of questions, and having people that you've met and networked with at these meetings gives you a resource that you have all year round. And obviously, the beauty of that energy conference is the fact that it's people not only who are compliance people in general, but are in your field. We also have another specialty conference coming up at the end of May, which is the Higher Education Compliance Conference. Higher ed has a lot of risk areas because, you know, a great deal of their funding comes from the federal government. In addition, there's a lot of attention being paid now to sexual assaults on campus as an issue. So there's a renewed focus on compliance and, you know, educating people, not just staff, but students as well, into what behavior is and isn't acceptable. That conference every year has been offered in Austin, Texas. And again, that'll be May 31st to June 3rd. It's timed for right after the end of the school year. We also co-offer that with our other association, the Healthcare Compliance Association has a research compliance conference at the same time.
Let me go back to the Utilities and Energy Conference because it has a component that I found particularly enlightening, actually, in my own increase of knowledge around compliance, and that is the pairing of utilities and extractive industries. And the reason I say that is utilities is one of the most highly regulated industries, and for them compliance is a baked-in day-to-day process that they practice. And I've probably learned more about the process of compliance listening to utility executives or utility folks talk about their process. And so that really led me to being intrigued by other industries, the way they have to do compliance. Are there any other sort of pairings that the SCCE might do similar to that?
You know, I don't think so, other than the fact that, you know, if you take a look at the agenda for the Compliance and Ethics Institute, which is our annual meeting, you know, there's a huge range of industries there, and you really make several good points in your comments. One is you can learn a heck of a lot from highly regulated industries, even ones that are totally unrelated to yours. I mean, you can be a specialty retailer selling hats and learn a lot about compliance from a defense contractor, because typically the more regulated the industry, the more they've had to understand this. And I think in general, one of the things that a lot of people lose track of is if you look at the heart and soul of a compliance program, it's all about finding and fixing problems and preventing them from occurring. And there's a lot to learn from what other industries have done because, one, the heart and souls are the same. Secondly, even though you may think you're an unrelated industry, there's a lot you're going to have in common. One, the people factors are always the same. Two, again, a national retailer or an international retailer is probably dealing with a lot of the same global issues that an oil and gas company is facing, or a technology company that's got operations around the world too. You're still up against dealing with multiple jurisdictions, different sets of how the law should be followed or not, issues around things like how do values translate across your organization. And really, I think, it's one of the things that's funny is when we look at the membership of SCCE, we see it's pretty much every industry except healthcare, for which there's a separate association, Healthcare Compliance Association, and it's twice the size of SCCE. It's a very big profession. And then financial services. And I think it's one of the big shames, and what's interesting is we get a lot of healthcare people crossing over to SCCE meetings. Other than the insurance business, we don't get very many financial services people. And they're a very heavily regulated industry, and I think they're the only heavily regulated industry that doesn't learn from other heavily regulated industries.
And I once gave a presentation. It was essentially to AML compliance officers, and it was to facilitate a discussion. And the more I listened to their questions and I listened to their day-to-day concerns on how they were required to do AML compliance, it struck me that there was a talent pool there that we in the anti-corruption compliance field are not tapping into, and that even within companies they're so siloed they're not ever talking to each other. And the PEP or politically exposed person checks or other checks of that AML folks do to see who they should be doing business with, that never bleeds over into the anti-corruption field, and it struck me that there's, like you said, there's a lot of talent there, and certainly anti-corruption compliance practitioners could learn, and we could probably give some lessons back to them if we could talk together.
Oh, absolutely. And, I think there's a lot of learning. I mean, I think the funny thing, by the way, to tell you how extreme the differences are, Roy Snell, the CEO of SCCE, and I went to an investment advisor conference, and to a group of compliance officers for that world, and literally not one of them had heard of the federal sentencing guidelines when he asked the question. I mean, that's how different it is. There's a lot of these learned. If you look at what's going on with sanctions, so much of the issue revolves around, because the sanctions in Russia aren't just countrywide, they're by sector and by individuals. You're seeing basically sort of the same kind of third-party research you have to do for FCPA in the sanctions setting as well. And yeah, the more that we can get talent who's dealing with these various related issues talking to each other and learning from each other, I think the better off we all are.
And I would point to my own experience with the national conference last October, where I heard several healthcare professionals speak, and I learned quite a bit about the process by which they do and burn compliance into the DNA of the business. So lots of need for that cross-fertilization.
Yeah, healthcare has been doing compliance in great detail for a long time. I mean, given the number of people who are Medicare patients, you're billing the federal government, the challenges of the False Claims Act, and the risk that it poses, there's a lot there that can be learned from.
Adam, if I could turn now, you and Roy and others really tend to have your finger on the pulse of SCCE, and more importantly, its members and the issues facing their members. What are some of the things you've heard bubbling up over the past couple of months?
I think there's a lot that's the same and some things that are changing. I think in terms of saying anti-corruption still remains a big issue. There's a lot of new fines that are coming out. People are looking to see, what are the lessons they can learn with that. Another issue that's not specific to a compliance risk area is the role of the compliance officer and where he or she reports. There's a lot of back and forth about should it report to the general counsel or not. Now, compliance officers are adamant that the general counsel's office is an important ally, but they should have a direct line to the CEO and or the board, depending on the organization structure. There's pushback from the general counsel's office, and the data shows most organizations already have things set up so the compliance reports straight to the reports to the board or CEO, but it's still an issue there. And I think a related issue comes with some people not sure what a compliance officer is. There's a lot of people who may hold that title. You've got OSHA compliance officers who are a specialty, area, and they are compliance officers, but it's not compliance like we see it. Other issues coming up, as I mentioned before, data protection is getting to be, just an enormous risk area and tremendous amounts of concern. There's a lot of organizations where if compliance hadn't been in charge of data protection and privacy, they are becoming that now. And so there's a learning curve there for both sides.
Have you seen really an uptick in that after the Sony scandal?
I wouldn't say so much the Sony. I think it started back with a Target breach last year. And I think as people start realizing the scope of the risk area, there's a natural fit there. I was just reading an article today. I think I tweeted out a link to it. I think it was on the Associated Press, about companies have started hiring firms which basically do, if you will, white hat phishing. They send out emails to your employees that are typical of what you would expect from a hacker, phishing, and then let the employees know they've fallen for it. And if this person wasn't working for the company, you would have thus compromised the system. When you look at that, it's a little bit more creative than we see in most compliance training, but it's very similar in terms of trying to get people to understand it.
Right.
And I think, there's a good risk that, there will be increased legislation in this area. But at the same time, you're seeing already in Europe, there's strong regimes in place. And once again, we get into third-party risk here. The Target breach came out of a third party. And a lot of organizations have opened up their systems as supply chains get integrated to third parties. So the question gets to be, much like with FCPA, who's the owner? What are they doing? What kind of controls do you have in place? It's not so much the, not bribery specific, but it's how are you protecting your passwords and ID? How secure is your network? Because somebody gets into your vendor's network, they may be into yours soon.
Right. Adam, unfortunately, we're nearly at the end of our time, but I was wondering if someone wanted to get in touch with you, could they shoot you an email? And if so, how would they do it?
Absolutely. The best way, my direct email is adam.turteltaub, and that's spelled very trickily. It's Turteltaub @corporatecompliance.org, or just call it 818-501-1232. And I should note I'm in Los Angeles, not Minneapolis, where our offices are. And then the other thing, though, is you can just go on to the SCCE website, which is corporatecompliance.org, and be able to find my contact information there.
Adam, I want to thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you at the next conference.
I look forward to seeing you too. Take care, Tom.
Thank you.